Hello and welcome to The Green Stream, a podcast brought to you by Sustainable Business Network Detroit, a network of partnerships between Southeast Michigan stakeholders, innovators, and changemakers. Each partner is on a mission to advance and amplify sustainable business practices, and we're here to learn from, share, and help activate a sustainable way forward for Greater Detroit. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And head over to our website, sbn-detroit.org. Now, let's listen in to our conversation with today's sustainability leaders.
Well, hello again and welcome to the Green Stream. I'm Terry Barclay, President and CEO of Inforum, which is one of the largest women's business organizations in the country focused on accelerating careers and creating opportunity. But I'm chair of the Sustainable Business Network of Detroit. And SBND is focused on creating a sustainable way forward for every business. And that is why I am so excited about our guest today, Carlos Martinez, who is president of People First Economy. And Carlos, you have had such a fascinating career. I really hope you'll take a minute to introduce yourself and talk about how you came to your current role.
Thank you so much, Terry. So yeah, my name's Carlos Martinez, and I grew up in a few different places, born in Dominican Republic, and then raised between New York City and Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so I always start with that because it really does influence the way I approach work wherever it's been. And so, that professionally, it started with higher education where I worked in admissions. I had the pleasure of driving all over the state of Michigan, recruiting high school students. I made a pivot into the career development world where I would work with companies in Michigan, but then also for a few years at New York University as well. And I was working with companies globally looking to recruit United States students, but always in roles where I'm connecting organizations to community partners, in particular the world of business. After making a return, I boomerang back to the great state of Michigan, like we're seeing many folks do, and I highly encourage you, if you're looking out there and considering coming back, we'd welcome you with open arms. I served the time as the director of development at the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, so taking a deep dive into building inclusive economic systems and business support networks for Latino and immigrant entrepreneurs across the west side of the state, which is what led me then to build great connections with organizations like People First Economy, and it just felt like a natural fit, and I'll pause there because I can talk too much sometimes, but People First Economy just really aligned with my values in more ways than one, and the way that work was being done around the state of Michigan felt like a very natural next step in my career journey because I could still approach it with a very inclusive lens.
Well, exactly. And it's so funny that you mentioned boomeranging back. I'm also one of those people who wasn't born and raised here, but this has, been my home for a long time now. And there are so many strengths. And sometimes you can see those strengths and opportunities more clearly when you step away for a little bit and come back. So we're really glad. Thank you for coming back. We're so excited to have you here. It's really great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Carlos, share, I can tell that inclusivity is at the core of your work and your approach. So could you talk just a little bit more, in a little bit more detail, about your focus on sustainability and how you blend and bring in economy, community, partnerships, and how you hope to deploy that thinking in Southeast Michigan and the city of Detroit?
Wonderful. And I think to contextualize that answer, it might be helpful to give just a very brief overview of People First Economy.
Yep.
So People First Economy, at our core, we are a business support organization, right? Started a little over 20 years ago as Local First. So across the country, there's been growing movements of independent business alliances. Independent meaning locally headquartered, not a franchise. Studies will show that it helps build that local living economy, stronger community infrastructure, leads to better economics. And that's a big part of the sustainability piece. Now, nationally, the independent business movements have always had a very strong strain of sustainability work. And so over time, our work grew into programs like first Good for Grand Rapids, where we were helping the city measure some of their sustainability practices, but then over time, Good for Michigan. And so it's become things like leading educational cohorts, good job cohorts with nonprofits that support early childhood care providers. It's been collaborations with the MEDC and supporting some of their peer Michigan Business Connect support services for small businesses around the state of Michigan. And it's looked like over time also collaborations with great organizations like the Southeast Michigan Sustainable Business Forum we've been working with for over 4 years. And so we pivoted, rebranded a few years ago into People First Economy to better capture all these different moving pieces. So there's 3 components to it, right? So we have Local First Independent Business Alliance. We have Good for Michigan, currently serving, last I checked, about 158 businesses around the state of Michigan. A little over 20 of those are in Southeast Michigan right now, where we are helping small businesses and some larger ones track and measure their social and environmental impact, right? So it's not just how are you caring for water, how are you caring for nature? It's also gender equity. It's also ending poverty, sustainable communities. So very robust measurement systems, and we'll work with them on implementing some of those changes. And sometimes that means connecting them to community partners. And so part of our theory of change through Good for Michigan is centered on 3 pillars, which models a lot of the B Corp movements, which I know we'll get to in a bit here, racial equity, climate justice, but then also stakeholder governance. And so helping businesses understand that by becoming a force for good, it means that triple bottom line is key. We have to develop practices that take care of people, that take care of the planet, and it doesn't mean you're sacrificing profit. You can still be a very successful company by centering all 3 components. So whenever we enter a new region, we're not just parachuting in. We're working with local partners. We're asking them, what are you seeing? What do you need? Where do you think we could best support you? Maybe they have a very strong climate justice framework to what they're doing already. We're going to fall back and say, well, hey, maybe there's this other piece of the puzzle we can support you. And so it's always done in close collaborations. We have an open position, which unfortunately is closing tomorrow. So by the time this airs, hopefully we're deep into the interview rounds where we're hiring somebody who will be based in Southeast Michigan, specifically catering towards the Metro Detroit communities to allow us to continue developing out what that works look like, but with a very local lens and focus where they can inform the way our work manifests itself in the region.
Oh my gosh, Carlos, you said so much right there. And if you'll bear with me here,
Yes.
what I often hear, especially from small businesses, is that they equate sustainability with added expense.
Yeah.
And you, when you were talked about the ways that you help measure outcomes. Could you maybe give an example of that in a way that makes it real?
Yeah.
And not just buzzwords that are being talked about. You know what I mean?
I do. And so when we're working with small businesses around the state, we always like to take a global lens to a local problem, right? And we allow that to influence it. And so as the state of Michigan licensed partners of B Lab US and Canada, who are the folks behind the B Corp certification in our region here, in our region of North America, we're conducting assessments. And so there's 2 particular assessments. One of them is the SDG baseline. And so SDG just means for Sustainable Development Goals. These are the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They're used globally. But then we also have the B impact assessment that's a little more robust. And that's really more for those who are saying, hey, I do want to go a little deeper and consider B Corp certification. So between these assessments, there are over 250,000 companies around the world who have taken them, and we're bringing them to Michigan entrepreneurs. There are 8,000 certified B Corps. So you see there's a big gap. And so for us, it's not like B Corps or bust, but we would love to grow that community. The idea is, where are you starting in your sustainability journey? Some industries will be more challenging than others. I think I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. But when we're measuring it, it's, excuse me, got a tingle in my throat. When we're helping businesses measure it, the goal is, how are we going to help them on the sustainability piece? And there are various studies around the country that will show you how those businesses who are more sustainable, who are approaching the triple bottom line impact, are outperforming the ones who are not. And I'm going to cheat in a second here and pull up one of my quick statistics to give it to you, right? And so, there's a 5% increase in customer loyalty. So it can increase that company's profitability by 25 to 95%. And for any of the stats I'm sharing, just so you know, if you want me to share the resources, I can later on as well. And so that can lead to an increase in profitability from anywhere from 25 to 95%. Employee engagement, right? So by these companies who are, so part of the business case for being more sustainable is that it will improve retention, culture, and profitability. And so to share a few of those with you, we have things like 81% decrease in absenteeism, 18% increase in productivity, 23% increase in profitability. And these are national surveys, just so you know, so it's not just Michigan specific. You also have to consider things like replacing an individual employee can place it between 1.5 to 2 times the employee's annual salary. I know a lot of the work you're doing with Inforum is going to tackle these topics as well, so we're speaking the same language. 7 of 10 employees consider leaving a job for a new, more fulfilling opportunity. 1 out of 3 are willing to consider a lower pay for it. I think we all know many people who have taken a lower pay since 2020 to find a more values-aligned business. In particular, when you start looking at millennials and Gen Z, studies will show you that they're more likely to support companies that are values aligned than some of the more seasoned generation, right? Senior leaders who are always thinking about culture, have the people named senior leaders as part of the barrier to finding fulfillment in their work. And so when we look at some of these statistics, companies who, B Corp companies on average were outperforming the market, right? Or companies that were centering ESG metrics were outperforming the market. And in an anti-ESG environment, so we're kind of seeing a pendulum switch shifting right now in a very different direction across the country. What you're going to find is that internally, the company leaders are still supporting it, even if they have to change the language in which they're implementing it, but their employees are still looking very closely and calling them to task on it. So our role in it is helping them track, for lack of a better word, those ESG metrics, which is, and so each company is different. We're not tracking Michigan companies specifically for these stats like profitability, and we're leaning on some of the national studies, some of our national partners. The Herb Institute at the University of Michigan is doing some really interesting work with that. You have many academic partners. You have many research think tanks around the world. So what I would encourage folks to do who are on the fence about how they're going to interpret these topics or whether it makes sense for their company is read the research, talk to business leaders in your industry, and as you're implementing it, give yourself grace, because it's not easy. It's not easy. This is difficult work. This is digging deep and trying to identify who am I as a company. This is dealing with many different stakeholders who are used to business as usual, but we're trying to shift you to using your business as a force for good in your community and the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I went on a longer rant there.
Oh no, but you packed a lot into that. You know, I've had people ask me, why is it important to actually be certified?
Mhm.
You know, what's the difference between actually being certified versus just enabling, working on these practices? Are what's
Of
your
course.
answer to that for folks?
My answer to that includes adding another critique. And that other critique to me, give it a stronger context is, what about greenwashing, which is
Yeah.
another very real practice, right? So what do we do with those who are certified, but we know are still doing damage to many different areas? Because that is a real thing. And so one, acknowledge that it's no system is perfect. Every single certification will have gaps. Uh, where we have found a lot of alignment with the B Corp movement more generally and broadly is that we have found that they listen. Anytime that we as Michigan's B Local Michigan, which operates under People First Economy, has brought feedback to them, we've actually seen it implemented in things like the certifications. We in things like creating programs like the Level program that's creating pathways and 6 months of free consulting for women, BIPOC owned businesses who want to work towards certification. But third-party certification is very important because it adds more context to the work that you're doing, right? We can all say we're doing these things, but having an external stakeholders dig deeper into your practices, offer feedback, show you how you're doing in your industry in comparison to others who are maybe further along their sustainability journey. The important thing that comes with certification also is an expanded community. So you're also tapping in. For many of them, there will be a business to, if you're in the business to business space, there's that case to be made. You're going to find a lot more potential customers. Uh, but third-party certifications, especially as certifications, gain more prominence, right? B Corp is one. There's, Fair Trade Network is another great one. I've talked to some folks in the construction industry doing one certification called Just. And so my thing is, align yourself with a broader community doing the work. And just like any industry, you're going to stay up to date on the best practices. You're building community, but then you can also teach others, right? You're going to be further along in some spaces. But overall, it's really just external certification allows for more accountability. And it gives you a stronger voice at the table because the folks who are doing this at the highest level, it is an international movement. So when I work with immigrant business owners in the state of Michigan, what I find is if they're Spanish speaking, Sistema B, sistemaB.org, every single thing that I have in English at a very high detailed level exists in Latin America. It exists in Europe. It exists in the African continent. It exists in Asia and in many different languages. I recently attended the B-Lab Champions Retreat in Vancouver last week. And I met folks from Portugal, from Japan, and this was the US and Canada. It wasn't even like the more broader international. And so I was getting connected and learning about the challenges because the way we implement this work in Brazil is very different than in New York City. Just like the way we're going to implement this work in Detroit is going to be very different than Royal Oak or than Grand Rapids. And they're all wonderful communities, but the lived realities in those local communities, the demographics, the socioeconomic standards will mean that you have to adjust it. And going back to the initial question, that external validation will give you more context for people who are doing it in a similar way that you are in similar industries. Beauty, health, manufacturers, cybersecurity, consultants, food industries, they're all represented. And you want to include yourself in a broader community of practice, just like Inforum is one of those communities of practice. Because again, for us, sustainability isn't just nature, it's that broader definition. And so as long as you're engaging, as long as you're helping build and give back to the community, for us, it's not B Corps or bust. To be good for Michigan, we want you to take the assessment, start where you're at, and we'll consider you part of that Good for Michigan community, wherever you're at. Now, if you want to go further along, we can walk with you and help you get to that certification later. But to us, it's not a failure if you don't do that. It's still a major success to start the journey and work on it wherever you're at, whatever feels authentic today. This is a marathon. It will continue. Just like if you compare it to like the stock market, there's ebbs and flows. We might be seeing some counter narratives being pushed right now, but the long-term trend is still up. COP, right? International standards. The long-term trend is still up because now capitalism is getting behind it. However you feel about it, it's happening. The markets have now determined that there's a financial market here with the green energy transition. So it's going to happen with or without you. That's also part of the business case.
Wow. Really, really well said. And, I really enjoyed the way that you connected this to what's going on globally outside the borders of our country. I just got back from some travel to Brazil, and it was interesting to see the this movement unfolding in that country. And it just, I think, causes all of us to think about how big the opportunity is. The opportunity is local, but there's no doubt that it's also global as we move through all of this and learn. So what have been, I'm kind of so curious, given your incredible experience doing this work, what have been some of the challenges that you've come across in terms of supporting sustainable business projects in our state and in Southeast Michigan and Detroit?
Yeah. When we look at a community like Detroit, right, community that's majority Black, majority folks of color, I want to say like 78% Black, maybe north of 90, and then you look at connected communities like Dearborn, we have one of the largest Middle Eastern speaking populations. Expanding that across the state, you also factor in things like there was a study recently put out a few years ago that in West Michigan, folks don't know this, by the year 24, and this was done by the Brookings Institute and the Right Place, which is the Economic Development Region of Oregon in the greater Grand Rapids area. By the year 2045, they're projecting the white population to grow 4%, African-American population to grow 40%, and then the Latino population to grow 130%. So whatever county, conglomerate they're using for that, as Michigan continues to lose, and I promise I'm getting to your answer here, as Michigan continues to lose people, I know we want to reverse that, and I fully believe we're going to reverse it. I think part of the conversation has to include there is healthy growth in certain communities, and they just happen to be more diverse, more international. And there tends to be a overrepresentation in the small business entrepreneurial community when we're talking about a lot of the immigrants, regardless of backgrounds. Strong increase in our refugee populations as well. And so connecting that to the sustainability work that we're doing and the more broadly small business support work, there's a few different challenges, right? The communities that we're discussing more often than not tend to be lower income. Educational attainment rates are not always the same as the majority white community. And so part of the challenge is educating, right? And so when folks are still thinking about how am I going to survive next week? How am I going to make the next payroll? It can sometimes be difficult to say, develop practices to take care of the environment, right? We know access to capital is a major one. That's across the board. What I don't always hear people talking about is some of the reasons why. And it's because the operational infrastructure is usually not where it could be, right? We're talking about many companies where they're using the same bank account to pay their mortgage or rent as they're using to pay their employees and to purchase their next shipment of goods and materials. Uh, when when a lot of the ARPA funds, a lot of the PPP loans came around the state of Michigan, one of the biggest reasons that Black and Brown entrepreneurs were unable to access those funds is because they didn't have the proper accounting practices to demonstrate to the lenders. And so we know a lot of the CDFIs in our state are dealing with this. Something else we hear about a lot is, how do you tap into the actual unrestricted funds? Where are the grants? Why does it feel like the grants and oftentimes some of the loans go to the same companies that don't need the work? Why is it that oftentimes small business owners who don't have personal wealth are denied, and business owners who have the personal wealth or have friends who can back them and sign a letter will get the loans approved at better terms, even though the actual operational infrastructure of their business is weaker? That happens a lot in our state, all across the state. And so I know some of these are systemic issues, but if we have to bring out that elephant and take a real strong look at it, right? Not just the tail, let's look at the whole elephant, not just a little piece of it. I forget the story, but let's look at the whole elephant. You know where I'm going.
It's the blind man and the elephant, and
yeah,
one
and
who's
so
touching. Yeah.
if we're really going to say that we care about things like inclusive economic development, access to capital is a big piece of it. Writing grants is a big piece of it as well. Making the language more inclusive. And I'm not just speaking other languages. I'm also saying in English. Can we make it more plain? You shouldn't have to be an attorney to understand your loan terms. Even if you speak English and went to college, some of that confuses me too. And so if it's confusing some of us who, we did maybe go to undergrad, graduate school, we work in the space, imagine the folks who, for many reasons didn't complete high school. If you're an immigrant and English isn't your first language, how do we bring you into the fold? So we need access to capital. We need unrestricted grants, startup funding. I love tech. I love big tech. Mm-hmm. The sexy industries are getting all the money. Mm-hmm. But how do we get some of that funding into the small businesses that are started by folks who don't come from personal wealth? How do we get them the proper training? There's a lot of organizations doing it, but if you talk to the small businesses, and this is around the state of Michigan, they're going to tell you there are many people who use our names and our likeness, but we don't feel they really helped us. Mm-hmm. That's part of the challenge.
And I would say that I think that the sustainability movement has many of those same challenges.
1000%.
Certainly in terms of the clearness of the language. I think people sometimes roll their eyes with words that have become almost meaningless because they're used so frequently. So I'm really excited to hear about what you and your organization are going to do to sort of demystify and turn those opportunities, talk about them plainly and clearly, so that business owners can connect and make a decision about whether this is for them.
I'm fully with you. And the third layer, I actually never mentioned the third piece of the work we do.
Well, I was actually going to come back to that, Carlos. So I'm glad you got there first.
Okay, and it's elevating the small business voice in the legislative process, because that's a part of what all of this entails. You go to any region, and this isn't unique to Michigan, this happens around the country, and you ask your elected officials, any topic, pick a policy, doesn't matter. What does the business community think about X? The whole notion of the business community is a misnomer. There are many business communities. There is no one or two organizations in our state who is truly identifying the needs and challenges and perspectives of small business owners when it comes to civic engagement. It's usually going to be the companies large enough and sophisticated enough to have government relations, a policy arms. And sometimes it's the amazing entrepreneurs who started those businesses who get involved in the political process. And so I would never say you push against that. You want them involved, but I think we need to fight to increase and expand what that voice means. And so we are engaging and growing our engagement with small businesses around the state of Michigan, around policy, right? When we look at a policy like paid family medical leave, which oftentimes folks will say, oh, it's bad for business. My response is, what business has said that? Are you engaging with the small daycare provider? Are you engaging with the small business owners who wants to take care of their employees and understands that when they leave, it will be really hard to replace them? And are we educating them properly instead of telling them this is going to hurt you, but not identifying the ways in which the proposed policies can be impacted by you to create standards and structures to support the small businesses who are getting on board with that. And so educating small business owners, expanding. Tomorrow, not tomorrow, today, in about 2 hours, we're doing a workshop with the Michigan League for Public Policy on civic engagement 101 for small business owners. So it's not about telling them what they should support. It's about educating them on the civic engagement process. And we'll share some policies that we believe are people first, are going to help support folks. Policies like access to increased affordable childcare, benefit corporation legislations, giving businesses the option to consider their stakeholders as opposed to shareholder primacy. So we want to create those structures to add more voices to the table. So again, it's never about fighting against anything anyone's doing. It's about understanding and pushing back on misnomers about who the business community is, what the business voice means, because there's an overrepresentation of our larger companies who should be at the table. They employ a lot of people. Many of them are doing great work supporting communities. So I would never say it like, I never want folks to misunderstand and think of this as a negative, but it's just saying that we don't have the full pictures. We need more diverse business owner voices. And some of the folks in our committee include Black and Brown business owners. And this is our board members who are helping inform some of that work. And so we're going to continue a lot of that in Southeast Michigan. So adding another layer to the business voice in the community that's sustainable, equitable, and is pushing for that circular economy in the region as much as possible.
Carlos, this is just very, very exciting. Is there anything else about your work that you want to bring up? I feel like we covered the main bases.
Yeah. The only other thing I would say is just reiterating that as we expand our work and support of organizations in the region, it's never about parachuting in. We said from the beginning, we need a full-time person and hopefully over time, a few people. So, any funders and my nonprofit, right? Any funders in the area who want to support and get behind this work, I would love to connect with you. Because I would, in an ideal world, we have a small team leading and evolving what our work looks like as good partners in the region to engage small businesses in a meaningful way and to be good partners when we're not the right group to lead it. We will step to the side and push forward those voices who are.
So to end on a positive note,
always,
we talked about what the challenges are. What have some of the wins been? What are some of the things that just really excite you about the potential in the future?
The potential is that I truly believe Michigan is a special state. And Detroit in particular, Southeast Michigan in particular, has been a historical leader of movements when it comes to organizing and environmental justice in particular. And so I strongly believe that any work that is seeking to do this at a high level across the country has to include Detroit. It's one of those very important cities with a very unique history in our country. And I the opportunity is that the work is being done. We just have to elevate those voices a little more. There's many environmental justice coalitions that are doing amazing work in the region that I believe could inform our work on the business perspective. I came away inspired, and international conferences can do this by nature. But when I attended the Champions Retreat in Vancouver, I had never been to a business conference that centered so many Black and Indigenous voices in particular. And that's another amazing opportunities. Who has the longest history in our nation of being sustainable and environmentally conscious? It's the Native American community. And there's a tremendous opportunity to bring those voices in increased ways into ways that informs our work. And so within the B Corp movements, we're seeing that happen already. And so we're part of that community of practice where we have to understand that when I'm in parts of rural Michigan, the way that this works manifests is a little different than when I'm in Detroit. But there's enough talking points and where I think we can build a very big tent. There's a lot of onboarding ramps. And I truly believe that as the climates keep changing around the country, and studies are showing that Michigan might be one of those climate refugee destinations, regardless of why you think the climate is changing or quote unquote not. Michigan is poised to play a pivotal role. And I think we're going to see increased funding come to states like Michigan to help lead that work. And we need to make sure that diverse groups of stakeholders are gaining access to that funding, and that it doesn't always go to the same 2 or 3 organizations in every region. Mm-hmm. Right? There's amazing work being done that we have to ensure gets funded. There's amazing voices, because if not, the rich continue getting richer. And again, not saying that this is like saying being rich is a bad thing, but from an organizational resource perspectives, it's the chicken or the egg problem. You want to fund innovative work to help grow it. But oftentimes, in particular for Black and Brown-led organizations across the state of Michigan, we're not funded until we're far along in the process, where a lot of other organizations, oftentimes due to relationships, get a lot of funding just based on potential. And so how do we become more equitable with the distribution of funds and with the organizing of resources statewide? There's a lot of good work being done in this space, but there's still a longer journey to keep walking.
Wow. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on the Green Stream today. And please, Carlos, thank you. You were absolutely amazing. So great.
Thank you.
To spend some time with you. We'll have to continue this conversation.
Yes. All right. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah. Thank you. You too.
Thank you for tuning in to the Sustainable Business Network Detroit, the Green Stream podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to follow us on SBN-Detroit.org and stay tuned for more conversations on sustainability from inside and around the city.